She knows. You know she knows. There was a moment, you saw it flash across her face, where the guilt was undeniable. Her eyes dropped for half a second. Her jaw tightened. Something in her caved inward, just for a beat. And then, nothing. No sorry. No admission. Maybe a change of subject. Maybe a justification that didn't even make sense. Maybe silence so heavy it felt like its own kind of confession. If you've lived through this, watching someone clearly know they hurt you and still refuse to say the words, "I'm sorry." You've probably run through every explanation in your head. She's stubborn. She's prideful. She doesn't respect me. She doesn't care enough to say it. But here's the uncomfortable truth. In most cases, none of those are the real reason. The real reasons are quieter, older, and a lot more human than, she just doesn't care. So let's break down what's actually happening. First, apology doesn't feel like accountability to her. It feels like surrender. Most people think an apology is a simple transaction. You did something wrong, you say sorry, the debt is paid, everyone moves on. Clean and logical. But for a lot of people, that's not how it feels internally. Saying "I'm sorry" registers as losing. Think about where that wiring comes from. Somewhere back in childhood, apologizing usually came bundled with something else. Punishment, humiliation, a parent who wouldn't let it go, a sibling who used it as leverage for years afterward. In some households, say you're sorry wasn't an invitation to repair a relationship. It was a public confession extracted under pressure, followed by consequences that had nothing to do with fixing anything. When that happens enough times, the nervous system stops treating apology as neutral. It starts treating the moment right before an apology as a threat, not embarrassment, an actual threat. The body reacts the way it would to any perceived danger: freeze, deflect, minimize, get defensive, change the subject. Anything to avoid stepping into that vulnerable position again. So here's the key distinction that explains almost everything. Knowing you were wrong and admitting you were wrong are two completely different events in the brain. One is a private, internal recognition. The other is a public act that, for some people, has historically come with a price. She can sit there fully aware, replaying the moment, feeling the guilt, knowing exactly what she did, and still not be able to make herself say the sentence. Not because she's choosing pride over you, because some part of her still believes saying it costs more than staying silent. The problem deepens when you add fear into the mix. Because this defensive wall around apologies isn't just about the past, it's about safety in the present. In many relationships, romantic, family, even friendships, apologies get weaponized. Picture this pattern. She says sorry once, genuinely, trying to repair something. And then weeks later, in a completely unrelated argument, it gets pulled back out. Well, you admitted you were wrong about that before, so clearly you do this kind of thing. The apology stops being a closing statement. It becomes evidence, ammunition to be reused indefinitely. If someone has lived through that, even once, even a long time ago, even in a completely different relationship, their brain learns a brutal, efficient lesson. Admitting fault is not embarrassing. It's dangerous. It's not a one-time cost. It's a permanent liability that can be reintroduced at any future moment, in any future fight, stripped of context and used purely as a weapon. So even now, even with you, even if you have never once done that to her, the guard often stays up anyway, because trust isn't rebuilt just because the current person seems safe. Trust is rebuilt through repeated evidence over time. This is one of the hardest parts of this dynamic, because from the outside, it looks like she doesn't trust you specifically. Often she doesn't trust the act itself, regardless of who she's doing it with. Yet there's another dimension to this that's equally powerful, and it operates on a completely different level. For some people, "I'm sorry" doesn't feel like two small words. It feels like an entire identity collapse. This usually traces back to a specific kind of upbringing, one where a person had to apologize constantly for things that weren't actually their fault. Apologizing for taking up space, apologizing for having needs, apologizing for reacting to something that hurt them, as if the reaction itself was the crime. In households like that, sorry isn't a tool for repair. It's a tool for making yourself smaller so the tension in the room goes down. If that was someone's daily reality growing up, then as an adult, the phrase "I'm sorry" is loaded with old, exhausting meaning. Saying it doesn't feel like, "I made a mistake and I own it." It feels like I have to shrink myself again to make this okay. And a huge part of her, the part that spent years fighting to stop doing that, resists it on instinct, even when she logically knows an apology is warranted and fair. This is why you sometimes see something that looks like arrogance but isn't. Over-explaining instead of apologizing. Sudden defensiveness that seems disproportionate to the moment. Deflecting onto something you did wrong 3 weeks ago. None of that is her trying to win. It's a nervous system trying to avoid a feeling it has learned to associate with disappearing. Simultaneously, underneath all of this, separate from past wounds and self-protection, Something else is happening in the relationship right now. There may be unresolved resentment sitting underneath everything, a quiet, ongoing feeling of, I always apologize first and you rarely do. When that's the case, an apology can start to feel less like accountability and more like an unfair tax. Like she'd be the only one ever putting anything on the table, while you get to sit back comfortably, having contributed nothing to the repair. This dynamic is rarely announced out loud. It usually shows up as stubbornness, as a standoff, as two people waiting each other out in total silence, each one convinced the other should move first. From the outside, it looks like ego. Underneath it, it's often an accumulated ledger. Every past moment where she took accountability, and it wasn't met with the same effort in return. To be clear, this isn't a healthy pattern, and it isn't fair to either person in the relationship. But it explains a lot of situations that look like pure stubbornness on the surface, and are actually something closer to quiet, unspoken bookkeeping. Given all of this, all these layers of protection, fear, and resentment, the question becomes, what do you actually do with it? The first thing to understand is that chasing the words almost never works. Just say sorry as a demand rarely produces a real apology, because you're essentially asking someone to override a threat response using pressure, and pressure is exactly what triggered the threat response in the first place. It tends to backfire, making the walls go up higher instead of coming down. Instead, what works is something that feels counterintuitive. Make space for the acknowledgement to feel safe rather than punishing. Something as simple as, I'm not trying to attack you, I just want to understand what happened, can lower the emotional stakes enough that accountability becomes possible instead of dangerous. In the same vein, you need to learn to recognize accountability that doesn't come wrapped in the word sorry. Phrases like, I shouldn't have done that, or that wasn't fair to you, or I see how that hurt you, often are the apology, even without the specific word attached. If you're only counting it when you hear, I'm sorry, you might be missing real repair happening in a different shape. Sometimes the words matter less than the willingness to acknowledge harm. Where things get clearer is when you address the weaponization directly. If apologies have been used as ammunition in the past, by you or by someone before you, that pattern needs to be named out loud, and you need to commit clearly to not repeating it. Trust doesn't rebuild in a single conversation. It rebuilds through a long pattern of proof that this time is actually different, and that proof takes time. But if the real issue is the scorekeeping, the accumulated resentment, the years of one-sided accountability, that's a separate conversation entirely. It needs its own space, its own time, its own willingness from both sides to actually inventory what's happened and why it matters. Trying to resolve that kind of deep resentment in the middle of one argument almost never works. It gets swallowed up by whatever immediate conflict you're dealing with, and the core issue never gets addressed. Because ultimately, the goal here isn't to extract the specific words you're waiting to hear. The goal is to build a relationship where honesty doesn't feel like a risk, where vulnerability is met with care instead of weaponization, where a person can say, I was wrong, without feeling like they're handing over a loaded gun. So, here's the core idea to take with you. Her knowing she was wrong was never actually the missing piece. It was never in question. The real missing piece is whether admitting it out loud has ever felt safe for her to do. If it hasn't, if every past apology cost her something, then no amount of asking, arguing, giving the silent treatment back, or waiting her out is going to produce a real, genuine apology. Pressure doesn't create safety. Only safety creates safety. If this video helped you understand someone in your life a little more clearly, hit subscribe. I break down relationship psychology like this every single week. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Out of these reasons, which one hit closest to home, either as the person staying silent or the person waiting for the apology that never came? I'll see you in the next one.